I'm at Stoke Mandeville, Buckinghamshire, England, the birthplace of the Paralympic movement. It was here that Sir Ludwig Gutmann pioneered a spinal rehabilitation programme with sport at its heart. In 1948, patients would compete in the first Stoke Mandeville Games, which would grow to become the Summer Paralympic Games as we now know it. But this is the story of the history and development of the Winter Paralympic Games, a history that is much less known, but no less interesting and important. I'll focus on 3 landmark Winter Games to tell this rich story: 1976, 1998 and 2010. To help me, I'll speak with organisers and Paralympians from the last 5 decades as we mark 50 years since the first Winter Paralympic Games in 1976. In the 1960s and 1970s, disability sport was fragmented and Paralympic opportunities were not available to everyone. The origin of the Winter Paralympic Games stemmed from a desire to provide sporting opportunities to a wider range of disability groups. Historian Dr. Ian Brittain tells us more.
The first Summer Paralympic Games were in 1960 and they grew out of the Stoke Mandeville Games in the UK, but they were only for paraplegic athletes, and so there was no available international competition for other impairment groups. Organisations started to be developed to provide opportunities for those athletes to get involved in sport. One of them was the International Sports Organisation for the Disabled, which started in the late 1960s and was at that time primarily aimed at people with amputations or people with visual impairments. At their General Assembly in 1974, the Vice President of ISOD, Bengt Nerja from Sweden, put forward the idea that the Swedish would host a winter Paralympic sport for the organisations that were under ISOD's banner. That led to the first games being held in Ornsköldsvik in 1976.
And we had all the venues for a Winter Olympic for the disabled. So we had ski venues, we had alpine venues, and we had just 1 year to organize all this. We held the opening ceremony in an ice hockey arena, about 2,000, 3,000 people, and Sir Ludwig Gutmann held a speech and he handed over the county governor, who also opened the Olympic Games for disabled. I think it was really exciting, especially as the games went on.
The Winter Olympic Games for the disabled took place in Örnsköldsvik, Sweden in February 1976. The event was relatively small in scale, with 16 nations and 198 athletes competing across 2 sports, para-alpine skiing and para-cross-country skiing. Mike Brace was one of them, and I met him at the National Paralympic Heritage Centre. So we're here today to talk about the 1976 Winter Games. So I'd like to kind of have an opportunity for you to reflect on what it was like in the build-up to actually going to the 1976 Games.
There was no sporting opportunities, absolutely nothing really available in London for people who were blind or partially-sighted. So I'd set this sports club up in '73 for the blind and partially sighted in London. We then got an invitation to try skiing in Norway. And I must admit, I thought that was pretty mad, blind people skiing, but I just loved it. For me, the thrill and the experience was just unbelievable. They decided that they were going to hold the first Winter Paralympics in 1976. Blind and partially-sighted were going to be included, and would we like then to trial for the Games? I think we'd done 2 weeks of skiing by that stage and got selected.
Örnsköldsvik, Sweden, 300 miles north of Stockholm last Friday afternoon. Among the competitors on this charter flight, the British team of 6. Örnsköldsvik welcomes the competitors from different nations, the blind, the partially sighted, the amputees, each in separate competitions.
When we arrived, we got allocated people we'd never met to guide us, and 2 of the 3 guides couldn't speak English, so that really didn't do us many favours.
Yeah, and you don't speak Swedish, presumably, that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We learnt fairly quickly.
And what was the equipment like that you used?
Equipment was really basic. We had wooden skis that were really not for racing, they were more touring skis. We had these nylon-y, plasticky ski suits that didn't breathe. The ski sticks weren't really adequate for the length of skis and your own particular technique.
Was that the same for other national teams, or was it just a British issue in terms of the quality of equipment?
No, I think it was mainly the British, given that probably us and Denmark in the 76 Games were regarded as the only 2 non-snow sport countries.
Right. So what was the reception from your other competitors?
I think there was a sense of camaraderie because they were all there for the first time.
Yeah.
The Winter Games hadn't been held before, so there was a sense of newness, but also trying to support each other to say, you know, if we make these games work, the ones that follow will potentially be even better.
And how did you feel the Winter Games was perceived generally?
The notion of disabled people doing winter sports, a lot of people did still think it was pretty crazy externally. Trying to organise the games and get proper sponsorship, proper, you know, Paralympic villages, etc., was really an uphill struggle for the organisers.
And for you personally, what impact did representing your country in the 76 Winter Games have for you?
I went blind aged 10, and therefore once I lost my sight and started the journey, there were so many people telling me what I would never be able to do, and very few people telling me what I might be able to do. And so suddenly doing the skiing, and then suddenly racing at the skiing, and then suddenly being picked to represent your country, really just shattered my own sort of pessimism, I suppose, about what the future might hold in store. But also they gave me something to then challenge other people's perceptions. And that's really what hooked me in, not only to do the sport, but then to try and make sure that more and more people with disabilities then had those opportunities.
And did you feel like a Paralympian in 1976?
Not really. You were aware that you were representing your country, but up until then it was largely the disability groups that were selecting the teams and supporting the individuals. So it felt a bit as though you were representing the blind at the games as well as your country. And that started to change, I would say, probably in the 80s and coming up to the 90s.
So 1976 marked the very first Winter Paralympic Games and a first experience of a Paralympic Games for visually impaired and amputee athletes. The 1980s saw a steady and measured development of the Games. They remained in Europe, and by the time we reached the 1988 Innsbruck Winter Paralympic Games, 22 nations and 377 athletes competed. Athletes with paraplegia, cerebral palsy, visual impairments, amputations and other disability groups were now eligible to compete. In addition to para-alpine skiing and para-cross-country skiing, the sports of ice sledge speed skating and para-biathlon had been added to the programme. More sports and inclusion, but still relatively small by today's standards. The 1990s, however, are the decade when the Winter Paralympics begin to grow at a faster rate. The 1992 Winter Paralympic Games in Teen Albertville, France, were the first Winter Paralympics to be hosted in the same host city as the Winter Olympics. The 1994 Lillehammer Games in Norway were the first overseen by the International Paralympic Committee and the first to include an athlete village for Paralympians. But I believe the most significant Winter Paralympics since 1976 were the 1998 Winter Paralympic Games in Nagano, Japan, the first held outside of Europe. The Winter Paralympics are now truly a global event with increased media engagement.
As we get to Nagano, obviously then there's an explosion of interest, if you like, particularly from the media. There was a real spike in media accredited people at the Nagano Games. There were actually 5 different sports. So you had alpine skiing, cross-country skiing, biathlon, para ice hockey and ice sled racing, which was actually, that was the last time ice sled racing actually appeared at the Winter Paralympic Games. It was the first games in Asia, first Winter Games in Asia. New nations were getting to see what disabled people could do in terms of winter sports, what opportunities there were to actually see somebody who maybe looks like you or has a similar impairment to you doing a sport that you may never even have thought was possible. And so taking it to a new area where it's not so well known does provide that development opportunity and that sort of role model opportunity, if you like.
According to the historian Dennis Frost, the 1998 Winter Paralympic Games in Nagano were a turning point for understanding and awareness of disability in Japan. The Nagano Games saw 562 athletes from 31 nations compete. Since then, only the 2018 Games in Pyeongchang, South Korea, had a greater number of athletes compete. Nagano was the final and only time athletes with intellectual disabilities were officially eligible to compete at the Winter Paralympic Games. For British Paralympians, Nagano was a special experience.
I was actually the chef de mission for the 98 Games. So I was there formally managing the team, managing the press. The Japanese audiences were probably the best amount of spectators we'd ever had at a Games. The infrastructure, the volunteers was incredible. I think they set the benchmark really for the Games that then followed.
Nagano was also the final competitive venture for one of Britain's most successful Winter Paralympians of the early Games, Peter Young. He remains the first and only Briton to have won medals in para cross-country skiing, winning bronze in 1984 and 1994.
The race is tomorrow. Are you nervous?
No.
Seem very sure.
I'm positive, in fact. You know, I told you early on that you don't know how good they are, so you don't expect to win, so the pressure's just not on at all. You just go out there and do your best.
Number 41, Peter Young, Great Britain.
3, 4, 1, go!
Yeah, come on.
Pete did everything almost instinctively. He could run with a ball almost attached to his foot. He could, when he was playing cricket, he could catch the ball like I'd never ever been able to dream about. He could run independently to a noise. So everything he did, you know, you wanted to emulate. Really had quite a good sense of humour, but also quite competitive.
There's 2 Swedes, a Finn and a Norwegian just gone past. Go on.
Good luck to them.
And what was he like as a skier?
Incredible. Because his fitness level, I mean, he bit the bullet. Once we got the bug in '76, that was it.
To be a cross-country skier, you've either got to be very fit, you've got to have sprinting ability, stamina, coordination, and so the amount of muscles you use are incredible, really.
He was then going to be pushing for sort of top 10 finish instead of the bottom end, and just incredible will and determination. Major competitor. He was the first blind cross-country skier to win a medal at the Paralympics. And for someone in Britain without the snow history to win a medal in Austria at the Games was just incredible.
He was the flag bearer in 1998, and what was that experience like for him?
That was pretty special, given that that was his last Games. He'd been doing the Games right the way through, and when we put him forward, he was in tears. That was probably the highlight from the Games for him. A major honour to be there.
The 1998 Nagano Games were the second overseen by the International Paralympic Committee. In 2001, they signed the One Bid, One City agreement with the International Olympic Committee, which legally mandated Olympic hosts to also host the Paralympics. The next significant development in the Winter Paralympic Games occurred in 2010. These were the first Games to have the same organising committee for the Olympic and Paralympic Games. Sir Philip Craven, the president of the International Paralympic Committee at this time, claimed the Vancouver Games were the best Paralympics ever. The quality of competition was higher and the demands on those vying to be Paralympic champion greater than ever. I spoke with Sean Rose, who represented Great Britain at the 2006 and 2010 Winter Paralympic Games. You've had two experiences of Paralympic Games. Would you be able to describe what it was like as an athlete?
It was an honour and a privilege to first be selected, to go to the Games and just see the icons of the sport were there, and you were like, wow, you know. So I went along to Turin, and I nailed the downhill, top to bottom. Little skid on one section. I missed a medal by 0.6 of a second in my first Games. Wow. 0.6. Yeah. I should have been nowhere near, but I just nailed this run, top to bottom.
This could be good enough for a podium. 1.68 in fourth place. An excellent performance for Sean Rose.
From 2006 to 2010, that was a process, and that was a time when I started to be a professional, an elite athlete, and working with different sports professionals, whether it be S&C, sports psychologists, waxing and tuning, and just going through them marginal gains and looking at 1%. And, you know, that took a long time, but I just started chipping away at the best in the world, and I was catching. And it was just a great sensation, great feeling. Going in 2010, that was my season leading up to the Paralympics, and we'd done all that fine tuning, and I felt like I was on top form. And I went to the World Cup in Sestriere, and I just nailed it and won. I just remember the evening we had the presentations and the awards. I don't know, you know, this is 20 years ago, and I'm getting emotional about it. But you know, I got up on stage and I was on the top step. The World Cup, the first time a Brit had ever won a World Cup gold medal in any alpine discipline, and the crowd were incredible. It's like a Brit, wow, you know, and where I'd come from, they'd seen the difference, and yeah, it was a moment.
You're at the top of your field. How did you feel going into 2010?
A lot of things happened. Turned up at the Games, and 3 days before the biggest race of my life, I'm in a downhill training run. I jumped off this little ramp, and when I landed a bit cross into this rut, and it took my ski off. And as it took my ski off, I went down feet in, I rolled over, and my arm stayed straight, and I just ripped all the tissues and tendons and in my shoulder. They said, look, Sean, you're out. You know, our team doctor, and said, look, you're done. And I just went, no, I can't go out like this. So I got it strapped up to my side, and I raced like this. I was winning the Super G, and I crashed, and I finished about 7th in the downhill. I was only 2nd off a medal, and now on my day, it would have been a different story. So really upset. I was doing pretty well in the GS, crashed, came about 8th in the slalom. So I was on it, but just not enough. I didn't have the movement. It'll hurt me for the rest of my life, the fact that I never medalled at the Games.
Vancouver 2010 marked a significant step in the development of the Winter Paralympic Games, and for British athletes in particular. Kelly Gallagher made her Paralympic debut at the Games, and 4 years later in Sochi, hoped for gold.
Coming into the 2013-14 time, me and Charlotte were looking for 5 goals, and we were really working with our sports psychologist in order to be able to manage the pressure that we had kind of brought upon ourselves. Charlotte knew then from ski racing what needed to be done, so we needed a physio, we needed a coach, an assistant coach, and a ski tech, and we really professionalised it.
And so you get to the Sochi Games, there's a lot of pressure on you. Describe to me the experiences that you had of the Sochi Games, please.
The Sochi Games were difficult because the resort had just hosted the Olympics, and now the snow wasn't what it had been the year before when I won gold on that hill. I look back at it now and I'm like, wow, like I did it. At the time in the Games, like I had a terrible time. I went and I wanted to win the downhill medal at the downhill. I came last in the downhill. I still don't understand how I skied so slow. Super G next, won it. It was a sense of relief. It wasn't a sense of accomplishment or delight.
Great Britain will get this women's Super G for the visually impaired category underway with her guide Charlotte Evans, and a similar gate set to what we saw on the men's on day 2, and Gallagher negotiates those okay. 1:28.72 the time set. Kelly Gallagher and Charlotte Evans take gold.
And I didn't really celebrate that win because I was expecting myself to do better. And then we did the combined and I came out, I fell over. I was having a really tough time and our comms weren't working. There was something going on with our comms and just everything seemed to be like against us. And I was really, really working hard to like get in the right space.
Good skiing here from Kelly Gallagher.
And then we went to do the slalom and my ski came off.
Gallagher's down again. She's lost the ski. Frustration for Kelly Gallagher and disappointment for her family and friends and supporters.
I saw other people like taking her medal and I was like, right, well, we only have the GS left. And then
Gallagher. Oh no, she's had equipment failure.
My ski came off in the GS and I literally lay on the snow. It felt like the end of the world. I let myself down and I felt like I let Charlotte down and I lost the gold and I had to watch everyone else compete for something that I felt I was just not part of. And I remember in ParalympicsGB, one of the comms officers, she was like, you don't know this, but like you've won Britain's first gold medal. Like when you get home, like there's a different thing happening in the bubble. And I was like, yeah, whatever. Like I was bawling my eyes out, like crying away. And then sure enough, like we're still talking about it. We're still talking about the gold medal that I won in Super G.
Kelly Gallagher together with Charlotte Evans. And of course, to Philip Craven as well.
Like I won. Oh my gosh, like I won it. Like after all that time, I did win a gold. But in the perspective being in Sochi, I went to get 5 gold medals. So I basically did 20% of what I expected.
Which game did you enjoy most?
Vancouver I enjoyed because there was no pressure. Sochi I enjoyed because I won something. And Pyeongchang I enjoyed because I took it all in, thinking to myself, this could be the last games.
So far, we've explored the history of the Winter Paralympic Games over the last 50 years. We've seen British athletes go from just 2 weeks of ski experience to years of professional training, from participation to gold medal successes. Where there were once one-off television features, there is now extensive live coverage. But what about the future? I asked our guests to consider the future development of the Winter Paralympic Games and the challenges that need to be overcome if they are to thrive for another 50 years. As such, I believe there are 5 main issues that need to be addressed. Number 1, athlete numbers.
There's a lot of work still to be done developing winter sport in places like Africa, providing opportunities. And obviously a large part of the reason for that is they just don't have the facilities to be able to train and prepare for a Winter Paralympic Games. And a lot of that is down to, access to the necessary geographic, topographic, weather conditions, etc.
As a Brit, we don't really have a lot of access to snow. And to be able to get onto snow, yes, we have indoor centres, brilliant. You can do a certain amount. In my off season, which is our summer, I'd be training indoors maybe once or twice a week at Milton Keynes or down to Hemel, places like that. So we can set up gates, you can replicate, but the big open space of the mountains, it's a little bit different.
In the summer games, you're covering most of the sports. But in winter games, I think there are more sports that can be involved.
I agree there needs to be more global representation and that adding more ice-based sports could help more nations to compete at the Winter Paralympic Games because ice sports are more accessible than snow sports. Number 2, female athletes. The underrepresentation of female athletes remains a challenge.
Since 1992 in teen, the percentage of women has only increased at the Winter Paralympic Games from about 19% of the total to about 24% of the total. Whereas if you look at the Summer Paralympic Games, they're probably up to about 45% women.
Support programmes have been introduced and progress has been made, but more needs to be done. Number 3, climate change. The Winter Paralympics are particularly exposed to climate challenges because of being in March.
The Winter Olympics happen, and then they need 2 weeks to be able to strip down the events and then reintroduce the event of the Paralympics. And that can sometimes be really, really difficult. So the actual timing of the games is really difficult because it happens in springtime and then the slopes have deteriorated a little bit. And so I think we do need to be in places that are more snow sure.
It would be a great question to pose, should actually the Winter Olympics be in January and Paralympics in February. We know we need to live within our means, and the International Paralympic Committee is not overrun with money itself. Probably historically it's been because that is towards the end of the season, and therefore that minimises costs.
Research suggests that by the 2050s, just a third of potential hosts will have suitable climate conditions to hold the Games. To be viable, the Winter Paralympics should be hosted in January or February. Number 4, inclusion of athletes with intellectual impairments. As far back as 1976, athletes with intellectual impairments competed in a skiing demonstration event.
We had some exhibition sports during the Games here, like ice sledge hockey and ice sledge racing, and also they call it then the mentally disabled people. I think there were 15 people who was involved in that.
In 92 and 94, we had intellectually disabled athletes as demonstration events, and then in 98 in Nagano, we had the one and only medal events available for intellectually disabled athletes.
Why do you think it took so long for there to be any events in the Winter Paralympics for intellectually disabled athletes?
I think the people weren't prepared to, in general, especially in the different committees or different country organizations, to see the possibilities. During the exhibition here, they really show that they were absolutely prepared to compete.
Eligibility exists at the Summer Games, but not the Winter Games. A campaign has called on the 2030 Winter Paralympics to include athletes with intellectual impairments at the Games. I back and support this call. Number 5, social impact. The Paralympic Games are a fantastic platform for raising awareness of disability and Paralympic sport, but research has consistently cast doubt on the relationship between megasport events and community sport participation. It is the underlying work of inclusivity and access to sport at all levels of society that should be the real focus.
I think that it is still very difficult to have a disability, get into sport young, have that encouragement, and there's still difficulties in accessing sport, and I think that's really something that needs to be addressed.
Disabled people's levels of sport and physical activity currently are lower than the average, and usually that's actually about the environments around how appropriate is the provision, and also frankly what the attitudes of the people you come across when you go and want to take part. Are you welcomed in? Does the receptionist know what's happening? Do the people in the class respond to you and are welcoming, that kind of thing?
What impact can the Winter Paralympics have?
The Summer and Winter Games are really key markers and moments for us to help achieve our broader vision for the organisation, which is through sport, inspire a better world for disabled people. So in terms of what we're doing, a couple of things really. So one is that we have a platform, Everybody Moves, which directs disabled people to sport, physical activity opportunities in their areas. It also prompts some of those activity providers to say, do you definitely provide inclusive opportunities in your area? If not, why not? So I think one of the things that we'll be doing is really pointing people directly from that Channel 4 broadcast through a QR code to the website. Only about 25% of disabled children, so they regularly take part in sport and PE in school. We know from teachers that it's mainly around confidence to deliver inclusive lessons. So we're doing a whole load of school programmes and all sorts of things for teachers to be able to deliver good inclusive activities. And we're also really highlighting that issue and really pointing to the government's curriculum review to say PE should be a priority and teachers should be delivering good inclusive PE as part of that.
The Paralympics can generate momentum and increase awareness of disability sport, but harnessing that into actual sport participation that lasts remains a challenge. Therefore, the Paralympics should be viewed as the cherry on top of the cake, not the cake itself. The Winter Paralympic Games have come a long way from their humble beginnings. From ill-equipped athletes to cutting-edge technology, the quality of Winter Paralympic sport is greater than ever. The contribution of early British athletes such as Mike Brace and Peter Young laid the foundation for Great Britain's gold medal winning Paralympians such as Kelly Gallagher, Menna Fitzpatrick and Neil Simpson. The Winter Paralympics is an established sporting event that is global and growing. There are challenges to overcome, but in identifying them, we can begin to address them, ensuring the continued development of the Winter Paralympic Games.